yay, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I pissed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't wanna pay. I've been on furlough since May. Never go and listen to a Cockney attitude. Ooh, breaking away. Got to find a better way. I'd rather watch Auf Wiedersehen again and listen to what these old men have to say.
Hello, and welcome back to Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast, and this is episode number 23. And hola, buenos días.
Yeah.
¿Cómo estás, Jorge? That is Spanish for how you doing, George?
Yeah.
So we are back in Spain, and obviously more is going to be said about that. But like I said, this is episode 23 of the podcast, and it is me, your genial host, Mr. Andy Sledge, and my co-host and late night podcaster at this particular day, Mr. George Bradley.
Yeah.
George, how the devil are you on this fine and wonderful evening? Even night time it is. Due to your work schedule, you've got us recording podcasts at 9:30 at night.
Yeah, it's all very strange, you know. It's dark outside, but yeah. Getting back to work's I'm glad to be back to work, but it's just you're sort of trying to do sort of other normal things that I would normally sort of just get off my sofa and do. I have to sort of, work around work, and I mean, I had to rush to the chemist to get some of my usual heart pills with 5 minutes to spare. I just made it, so yeah, I'm just doing stuff, but running about a lot.
And that stress couldn't have been good for your heart.
Nah, the heart's all fixed, so it doesn't matter. I'm fine.
Well, yes. So I am. Yeah, pretty much not much to report really. Had a very pleasant weekend with my fantastic young lady. We went we did on Saturday. We went. I was judging a boxing show on Saturday night.
Yeah, I've seen that. I look good. Yeah.
On Saturday during the daytime, and I went to this seminar with a guy called Damien Trainer, and then on Sunday, me and my kid went to Friends Fest in Bristol. And I tell you what, I could have done without that. Fucking getting up on Sunday and drive to Bristol was a massive thing.
Seem to be having fun there, though. Look good.
Oh yeah, he loved it absolutely. I mean, it's the third time we've been, so it wasn't exactly the as fantastic as it was the first couple of times. And I said this the last time. I said I will probably not go again, but anyway, I'm sure it'll probably happen. But so apart from that, mate, just trying to. Stay cool, mate. You know what I mean? It's but hopefully it was raining a bit today, so hopefully the temperatures are going to be coming down.
Yeah.
But we won't be.
I think they're going to go up again soon, though.
Up. So apparently, first 2 weeks of August are going to be another heat wave. So, and I'm traveling up to not this weekend, but next weekend I'm going to Newcastle for the weekend because it's my kid's birthday, my kid's 18th birthday, so I'm taking him up to see him.
Oh God! Yeah.
So all action in a couple of weeks. But what we would like to say is that if any of our fantastic viewers and or listeners have anything they would like to contribute to the podcast, whether it be just general support, pointing out anything what we've done wrong, or if there is anything extra you think we should have added in that we didn't, or just straight up abuse that me and George love.
Definitely, yeah.
Please do email us in at aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com. That's aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com. We urge you to follow us on social media platforms. Our Instagram is at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. That's Instagram at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Twitter is at Auf Again. That's Twitter at Auf Again. Our Facebook page is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And if you could like the Facebook page, share the Facebook page among your friends, and invite your friends to like the Facebook page. So you go to the community tab at the top, click invite friends, click invite all friends, and that would do us a massive favor to spread the word. And please do subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. So go onto YouTube and search Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast, click subscribe and click that bell, and that will alert you to any new episodes that we release. And as always, if mine and George's gorgeous faces are too much for you to handle, and you would just prefer to listen to our dulcet tones, then you can do so on all good podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google Breaker, and many, many more. So we are available on all good podcast platforms. New episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. And the theme music, as always, is composed and performed by the guitar man, Mr. Lee Dosky. So please do help out your podcast, your friendly neighborhood podcast, and please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. As always, we are sponsored by Top Gun Tattooing of number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading. Their website is topguntattoo.co.uk. Their telephone number is 01189 968 667. And remember, we have two fantastic offers for the listeners and watchers of the podcast. Offer number one, you can get a 20% discount off any tattoo by speaking to Zach. And you need to mention the code word Hadaway and Shite. So you speak to Zach either in person or on the phone, and you tell Zach that you're a listener of the podcast, and he will offer you the 20% discount of any tattoo with the code Hadaway and Shiteman. And remember, we also have the best offer in podcast history of a free tattoo. That's right, every single listener and watcher is entitled to a free tattoo from Top Gun Tattooing. Terms and conditions apply. What are they? Well, the free tattoo needs to be the Neville and Lottie tattoo. So if you want to get a Neville and Lottie tattoo, we will pay for it, and we will film it and put it up on our social medias. And remember, we are also in the middle of a giveaway. And the giveaway,
they received it.
They have indeed. So we got messages of Lynn Anderson, and we didn't get a message off the other guy, but I sent him a message to say that we'd sent out, it had been sent, and he replied. But Lynn replied saying that she'd received it, which was absolutely fantastic. So our previous competition winners are now all in receipt of their prizes. So if you would like to win a prize, which is this genuine signed photograph copy of the 7 in Dusseldorf, provided to us by the fantastic Graham Teasdale, then all you need to do is follow us on the social media, like the post, tag 3 friends, and share that post. So that is the current giveaway competition. Giveaway. So, George, that is all the boring stuff. Now, George, rumor has it that this is one of your favorite episodes.
Yeah, I did really enjoy this. I mean, partly because of they're in Spain and the Marbella thing, and obviously I was over there seeing you, and it's just makes it a bit more interesting. But
it does.
Very good.
Well, funnily enough, I'm going to mention that there is a bit where later on in the episode when they're in a part of Marbella, which is very close to where we were drinking back in the day. I'll tell you all about that in a second. So this is Auf Wiedersehen Again podcast, episode number 23, which relates, we are about to break down season 2, episode 10. And the episode is entitled Scoop. Now, obviously, Scoop does relate to the journalism that is featured heavily within this episode. And this episode was first aired on the 25th of April, 1986. And there are several well, I've got one, two, three, four. I've got 5 different cameos that we are going to talk about. So, And one of them is one of them is very special indeed. But we are going to talk about those as and when they appear. So we obviously have various locations. As we've already mentioned, we are in Spain. So they are predominantly in Fuengirola, but they are also in Marbella.
Yeah.
So the episode opens, and it is we see the plane landing at Malaga Airport.
Yeah.
And the guys are on the plane, and Dennis gets up and sort of moves his seat, and he's sitting there in front of Oz, and Oz opens up the overhead locker, and Oz's tool bag falls out of the overhead locker and lands on Dennis. And straight away, Dennis is not a happy camper, and he says, "What you got in here, man?" And Oz says, "Me," like as if it's there. He just goes, "Me tools." And Dennis says, "We're supposed to be tourists, man. You're not remember what Ali said." And he said, "Well, we've still got a job to do." He says, "Nah, look, man, we can get tools down there. You'll blow the whole thing if you take that lot through customs." So we cut to the outside of the airport, and Barry is pushing a trolley, and it sort of goes down a curb, and the bag falls over, and Barry's chastising the qualities, like, "That's bloody dangerous, that is." Anyway, our camp tour guide comes up and says, "Mr. Patterson, are you going on the coach with the rest of us?" And Dennis says, "No, we've got a minibus there." And he says, "I'll see you back at the hotel, cocktails at 6 and bingo at 7. So yes, he's still trying to rope them in with the geriatrics. And Oz is complaining. He says, "I've had them bloody tools since I was an apprentice, you know." And Dennis says, "Howard, didn't tell me you're sentimentally attached to a spirit level." And this is when we find out about Oz's sentimentality. And he says, "No, I'm talking about Roland, man." And Barry says, "Who's Roland?" And Oz says, "Me trowel." And then they cut back inside, and Oz's bag is going round and round. And the customs officers approach the bag with a sniffer dog and a metal detector. So they are unsure of what is in the tools.
You wouldn't be able to bring that on board nowadays, would you? No.
Like imagine that, trying to get through the X-ray with a trowel in that and fucking whatever. So we cut to the minibus, and the minibus they are driving down the coast road from Malaga to Fuengirola, and obviously there and everywhere they look, there's a building site.
Yeah.
And Oz says, "What was it Fraser said about us coming down here? He's sending a team down to help with the British unemployed." He goes, "Oh, what a load of bollocks." He goes, "It's obvious we're here because there's not a building worker available from Malaga to Jib." And Bomber says, "I never saw so much building in all my life." And Neville confirms, he says, "It's a British paradise." And Brenda says, "Mind, I think they've ruined the view." And Neville says, "Yeah, but think of the lads they're employing. They must all be millionaires." And Mox says, "You know, I had a totally false impression of this place. I thought it would be all, yachts and playboys and with Porsches. I've seen more bloody cranes than sports cars." Or he says, "Yeah, well, leisure is the growth industry of the 80s. And Neville says, "Not back home, it's not." And he says, "Well, we ain't got the climate, have we, Nev? Look." And then he points to a big water slide, and he says, "When would you ever see a bloody water shoot in Wolverhampton High Street?" So they cut and they arrive at their luxury hotel, as it is described later on. And Oz is getting the bags off the roof, and then Nev and Brenda cut. So Neville and Brenda get to their hotel room. And so Neville says, "This is it, right?" And he's talking to the bellhop, and he's like, "Right, there you go, thanks, da-da-da." And he says, "The two maroon ones on the top. Yeah, thanks, gracias, da-da-da." So they get it. They get everything in the room, and then Brenda looks in the bathroom, and she's not impressed. She goes, "Ooh, it's a shower."
Oh,
not a bath.
Shock horror.
And Neville says, "That's all right. I like showers, very refreshing." And she goes, "Aye, well, Debbie doesn't." And I'm like, "Oh, how many showers has Debbie taken? Probably none." And she goes, "Well, she's not very big. You can stick her in that thing, man." And he points at the bidet. And then She goes, ooh, Neville. And he goes, what? And then so the bellhop's waiting for a bit of a tip. And she says, pay him. And he says, I haven't changed any money yet. And she goes, look, I'm sorry, we haven't got any Spanish money. Will sterling do? And he goes, of course, senora, gracias. So she gives him a couple of quid. And then she berates Neville once again. She goes, honestly, you're hopeless at things like that. And Neville says, what do you reckon then? All right, really, isn't it? And she goes, it's a bit cramped for the three of us. Open the shutters, Neville. Let a bit of air in here. And he says, let's see what sort of view we've got. And he opens the windows, and lo and behold, they have a fantastic view of a building site. And there is a Spanish brickie. And he sees Neville and he waves and he says hello. He says, hola. And Neville just goes, oh, bloody hell. So they cut downstairs to the bar, and Oz is talking, and he says, well, this part of Spain is crawling with Brits, apparently. And Dennis says, well, it'll suit you like that, won't it? He goes, I mean, because you've got much more chance of getting tapped up by two birds from Beckenham than you have some Spanish senoritas, you know, because they're staunch Catholics. You're Spanish, you know. You take one out, Moxie, she'll bring her granny with her as a chaperone. And then he realizes that the barman is overhearing what he's saying. And he says, you know, of course, I respect that, like. So he backtracks a little bit. Now, the barman. So the barman is called Carlos.
Yeah.
Now, he, believe it or not, as a very, very long working actor, and has 106 credits on his IMDb.
Oh God.
And he was even in Magnum PI at once, London's Burning, Minder, Lovejoy, Poirot, Casualty, Little Britain, EastEnders, The Bill, Gavin and Stacey, Ashes to Ashes, Sherlock, Strike Back, Holby City, Doctor Who, Peaky Blinders, once the Spider-Man movie, and more recently that new Batman-related thing called Pennyworth. And basically, he's like, if any TV program needs like a token, like Spanish person, he's the one that they call us.
Manuel wasn't available.
Yeah. Yes. So that is the barman Carlos. So his name is Joseph Long, and he plays the barman Carlos. So, yeah. So that, like I say, so Dennis, he's talking about how the Spanish ladies will bring their granny as a chaperone. And anyway, so Barry turns up and he goes, how do? And he goes, uno limon, por favor. Barry thinks he's speaking Spanish already. And he says, Wayne and me have been scouting out the area. We're not exactly in the most picturesque part of town. Apparently, according to this street map, this hotel is situated between the Bullring on one side and the abattoir on the other. And Oz says, well, I hope they didn't use this place as a shortcut. And then Bomber says, who's coming downtown then? He says, it's not going to get too frantic in here, is it? And Moxie says, yeah, let's drink up, go for a walk. And then he says, where's Wayne? Yeah,
so obviously this one is filmed later, isn't it? This
scene. So this is filmed after Gary Holden passed away. And Barry says he's making a pathetic attempt to chat up the receptionist. And Oz says, well, let's hope she's got a tidy grandmother, eh? And then Bomber says, are you coming, Dennis? And he says, no. And he says, I'm all right here, thanks. And Oz says, oh, well, sorry you kind of come on the piss with the lads, but it was your decision to drag that tart along. Oz still not being very complimentary about Dennis's girlfriend. And he says, look, I'm waiting for Ali's call. And he goes, aye, way aye. And then Barry says, apparently the bar Mediterranean is very nice, full of the local colour. And then two of the old women from the group walk into the bar. And so the first old woman, her friend, she calls her Beatty. She goes, are you warm enough, Beatty? Now, you know, I'm not drawing any correlations between this old woman and my stepdad, but his name's Beatty as well. Anyway, so she says, are you warm enough, Beatty? I think you should have put your long-sleeved woolly on, you know. I mean, they're in Spain and they're talking about long sleeve woolies. He goes, I'm not tired at all. And she goes, that's not what I said. So one of them's trying to pester the other and mither the other one. Anyway, so Dennis, being the gentleman, says, good afternoon, ladies. Can I buy you a drink? And she goes, and the old lady, the first old lady says, Petey, this young man's trying to get me drunk. And he says, go on, first night of your holidays, glass of wine, something like that. Well, this old lady, the first old lady knows exactly what she wants. She says, no, I'll have a large gin with very little tonic, and she will have a brandy and ginger. So, yeah, Dennis was trying to persuade them to have a drink, and it seems to me like they're very, very, very au fait with the workings of a bar. So,
and later on, it progresses for them.
Yeah, well, we will find out later on that they will end up costing the lads quite a few pesetas. So we cut outside, and then we see the lads walk outside, and Wayne's there. And they walk off down the road, and Barry is in his standard attire of socks and sandals, looking absolutely fantastic.
And Wayne is in this shot, isn't he?
Yeah, Wayne's there. Anyway, and then they stop at a shop, and they are looking at buying hats. Anyway, then we cut to the villa. Ali Fraser's villa, and Vicky is not happy. And Ali Fraser is on the phone to Dennis, and Vicky's going on in the background non-stop. And Ali Fraser's trying to have a conversation with Dennis, and he says, no, don't come up tonight, Dennis. We've had a nightmare flight. Customs took us apart. And Vicky's like, I've never been so humiliated in all my life. And she's meh, 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 meh. And he says, right, bring the lads up first thing in the morning. He says, look, I'll give you directions. And then we cut back into town, and the lads are walking around town, and basically everything is shut. So, however, the place where we find out where most of the action is actually back at the hotel. So the camp tour guide turns up at the bar, and he says, "Cooey, right, you lot." And he's got himself a little catchphrase. He goes, "Un table, s'il vous plaît," and he goes, which is French for the supper's on the table, which it's actually not. So un table, s'il vous plaît just means a table, please. Yeah. So he's got that wrong, but never mind, we'll forgive him. And he says, come on, boys and girls, first one through gets a free plastic hip. You can take your drinks through. You don't have to gulp them down. I know you only paid £5 for your holiday, but let's try and enjoy it. George, leave your walking frame. It's not that far. So he's got his little catchphrases and his little jokes, and he thinks he is hilarious. And then so Dennis says to Christine, he says, Ali doesn't want to see us, so if you like, we can go into town and find a restaurant or a little bistro or something like that. And she goes, why don't we just stay here? He goes, I didn't think you'd want to eat in the geriatric ward. And she goes, they're lovely, so full of beans. I wish I could get my mother to come on one of these and do her the world of good. And he says, look, this hotel's a bit basic. If you like, I can go and find somewhere nicer. She goes, don't worry about it. I'm fine. Brenda and I are thinking of renting a car. And he goes, I just wish I had a bit more time to spend with you because I won't be having any continental holidays after this job's finished. And she goes, why do you say that? And he goes, back on the dole. And she goes, I thought you had your job back at home with Ali. And he goes, oh, it's there if I want it, but I don't. I'm packing it in. So he's revealing his future plans to Christine. So we cut back to the lads, and they've found a little bar that is actually open, and it's completely devoid of customers.
I mean, that's a bit strange in Marbella. I mean, I know the Spanish have the siestas and everything, but Marbella, the bars are always pretty lively, aren't they, during the day?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're in Fuengirola, but still, you'd expect that even off season, there'd still be something going on. But it depends.
I mean, I've been in little villages in parts of Spain where it just dies, in the afternoon. But
So they're all sitting in this bar, and Moxie suggests, she says, shall we get a cab into Marbella and check it out? And Oz says, no, I just want to get to me pit. Says, Christ, I've had more excitement in Berwick upon Tweed in Berwick, on a wet Sunday afternoon. And Wayne says, yeah, let's put the lid on this one. And Barry says, mind you, it's Tuesday. And then then everyone sort of looks at him and he says, well, what I mean is nothing ever happens on a Tuesday, is it? And then Oz says, he goes, I think Newcastle won the Fairs Cup on a Tuesday. And Moxie says, I knew this bloke who killed himself on a Tuesday. And then this is a fantastic line. This is a very well delivered, great delivery on this comedy. Moxie says, Moxie, like I say, says, I knew this bloke who killed himself once on a Tuesday. And Wade just goes, been in here, had he? So obviously they're not impressed. So we cut back to the hotel bar and the oldies are having a knees up. And the song
When I'm 64,
is kicking off and they're all singing along. And Oz says, can you believe it? We're traipse all over the tune looking for action and it's all happening here. And Bomber says, well, there's only one thing to do, Oz. And Bomber grabs an old lady and starts having a dance. And Oz looks across the bar and there's an old lady starts winking at Oz. And so he says to the barman, he says to Carlos, he says, can you make that a large one? And he decks his large brandy and he goes over to the old lady and asks.
But I like the way Bomber has his his usual blazer on, but the shirt is unbuttoned to the waist.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't go any. He doesn't when he's out looking for action. He's got his blazer on.
Yeah.
That's
in Germany. It'd be the tie.
Yeah, absolutely. So Neville and Brenda are in bed, and the baby is crying. And obviously they can hear the noise from the bar downstairs. And Brenda says, oh, not again. And Neville says, it's hardly surprising with all of that racket going on downstairs. So the next morning, they cut to the minibus. Yeah, so they're back in the minibus and they are on the way to find Ali Fraser's villa. And unfortunately, whoever's decision was, I think they put Barry in charge of the directions. And he says, I think it's up ahead. And Dennis says, what do you mean think? Is it or isn't it? And he says, I'm not sure. I mean, none of the bloody roads have got names. And I mean, we went right past the tennis ranch, right? Then we took the left-hand fork down the unmade road. Then it says here, after half a mile, the tarmac starts again. So you go up the hill and it's the second villa. And I mean, that is typical of Spanish direction, you know.
I like the way the soundtrack as well. It's done with Spanish guitar, isn't it?
It is. And there's a fantastic bit of soundtrack later on when it sort of cuts from. I'll point it out later when the police sergeant comes up. Oz says, has it got a name or anything? And Barry says it doesn't say nothing. And so they arrive outside a villa that they think is Ali Fraser's, but it's obviously not. And Dennis just says, well, it must be this one. And Oz says, well, there's no car about. He says, well, they might have gone into town. And Bomber says, maybe they're round the back. And so they go and have a look. And Dennis is shouting out, hello, hello. And Barry says, well, this is all very nice, isn't it? And Wayne says, well, the pool's a bit small, ain't it? And Neville says, and yours is an Olympic size, is it? The one in your backyard in Tilbury. Obviously, Neville's a bit cranky from a lack of sleep. And Wayne says, oh, what's wrong with her? Got out the wrong side of bed, did she? And Neville says, yeah, 17 times. And he says, do you think I slept with a racket that you lot were making? At 7 o'clock, them Spanish Britties were back on the job. Oz says, where was this? And he says, about 3 feet from my pillow. And Moxie goes, oh, we don't get that. We're on the other side of the hotel. And Neville says, who arranged that? And Dennis admits, says, well, I did, Nev. I thought the further away you and Brenda and the Ben were from the lads, the better, you know. And so then Bomber, straight, trying to draw them back to work, he says, what's Ali want us to do then, Dennis? I thought it was supposed to be finished. It wasn't supposed to be finished. And Dennis says, oh, he wants the swimming pool extending and a terrace built. And he says, well, you can only build a terrace that way. And he says, we'll have to cantilever it. Dennis says, he wants a cascade building over it as well and a brick barbecue. And Wayne says, well, we should do that first and we can have barbecue chicken for lunch every day. And then Oz even says, Oz is even complimentary. He says, well, I've got to admit, Dennis, you certainly came up trumps for the boys on this one. This is, without a doubt, the pleasantest building site I've ever worked on. And Barry says it beats Dusseldorf hands down. And then Oz says, we can have a dip every day. And Barry says, well, actually, no, not if we're extending the pool. We're not, unless you want to dive straight into a heap of rubble. And Oz says, well, that's more reason to get in there now. And Moxie says, will that be all right then? Can we? Now, if you notice, have you seen that Moxie's wearing a pair of these Nike trainers, right?
Right.
They're like a red and yellow color, and they were very, very popular in the 80s. And Nike have just re-released them recently. I'm a fan of the trainers myself, and there was a lot of chatter on the trainer Facebook groups about them. Me personally, not my cup of tea, but yeah,
I'm more of an Adidas man.
Me too. Yeah. But they were a limited re-release for your size, I think, and they got their sold out like straight away. So, but yes, that was Moxie's got the originals on there. So Moxie says, is that all right then? Can we? And he says, well, I don't know. It's not our pool, is it? He says, well, we're not a bunch of letters, you know. It's not as if we're going to pollute the bloody thing. And I says, well, even if we do, we're pulling the plug this afternoon. So, and Barry says, I must admit a dip would be very refreshing, wouldn't it? Particularly before a hard day's graft. The sun will be overhead soon. And Wayne says, yeah, and Ali said we should make out like tourists, didn't he? And Dennis says, how are you then? And Moxie says, all right. And then Bomber says, not me, Bomber can't swim. And Wayne says, go on, and he pushes Bomber into the pool. And Neville says, hang on a minute, none of us has got cozies. And Oz is straight away, he says, it's not that formal, man, naked as nature intended it to be. And Wayne says, that's right, see, this way I can get an all-over tan. And he dives into the pool. And Dennis says, I just hope that Vicky doesn't come out and find 7 British dongs floating in the water.
Mm-hmm.
And Moxie says, not in an empty stomach, no. So they're all in the pool and they're all messing around. And we see the actual residents of the villa arrive.
Yeah.
And it's
in a lovely old Rover.
It's definitely not Ali Fraser. It is a retired couple called Jeffrey and Pauline Oxlade. So Jeffrey Oxlade is played.
He's been in a few things.
He has a lot of stuff. He's very, very prolific actor. So Jeffrey Oxlade was played by Patrick Godfrey, and he has 161 credits on IMDb. And you know, a lot of the stuff was from a long time before I was born, but he was also in like Doctor Who, Z Cars, Blot on the Landscape.
Room with a View.
Yeah, he was in that film Clockwise with John Cleese, Poirot, Finder, Inspector Morse, Soldier, The Bill, Casualty, and Heartbeat, and many, many more. Yeah,
Remains of the Day. He was in that as well. That was a good film.
In a lot. And the lady who played Pauline is Georgine Anderson, and she has 77 credits on IMDb, including Upstairs, Downstairs. Also,
one of my favourites.
Never the Twain.
Yeah,
remember that? That was a good show.
Oh, that was a good show. Donald Sinden.
Yeah. It was funny, wasn't it? Corrie. She was in Coronation Street, Heartbeat, Casualty, Midsummer Murders, and also Doctor Who. So yes, both of the actors who play this old retired couple are very, 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 very experienced. So they turn up and Jeffrey says, who does that belong to? And she says, I've no idea. And he says, is it what's his name's day to do the pool? And she says, no, he comes on Thursdays. And he says, yes, but you know what they're like. And she goes, no, I know him. He's got that little yellow car. So they're getting the shopping out and they're going in the house, but then they hear the commotion from round the back. And he says, can you hear something? And And so they cut back to the pool, and Moxie suggests, he says, shall we have a go at that synchronized swimming? Getting the next team for the Olympics. And Oz says, that's bloody outrageous. It's got to be the stupidest thing I've ever saw. All them tarts covered in makeup, nose clips on, and it's supposed to be a bloody sport. And Moxie says, hey, come Ed, let's have a crack. Come on, let's form a circle. And Oz says, well, you can be the team leader. And so Moxie says, 1, 2, 3. And they all do a handstand, and their arses and knobs are poking out of the water.
Yeah.
And as this happens, Jeffrey comes around the corner and he says, good God, Pauline, don't come any further. And she goes, who's in our pool? And he goes, I'll take care.
Puts his hand up, doesn't he?
Yeah, I'll take care of this. And Oz is joking. He says, did we make the team? And he goes, hey, you lot. And Dennis is like, oh, good morning. And he says, never mind, good morning. Can you explain who you are and what you're doing here? And Dennis is trying to quiet. He goes, hold it, shut up, man, shut up, man. He goes, we're waiting for Mr. Fraser. And he goes, who? And he goes, and he tells them to shut up again. He goes, keep it down. He goes, is this not his villa? And he goes, no, it's not. It's mine. And then the wife comes round the corner and Oz gets out, ball bollock naked, wanger swinging.
You can see his bare ass.
And she goes, Jeffrey, they're all naked. And he goes, well, it's not customary to wear a morning suit when you're gone for a swim, missus. And he says, if you're not out of here immediately, I shall call the Guardia Civil. And Dennis says, now, look, pal, this has been a legitimate mistake. You know, there's no need to go over the top. I mean, we're all Brits here. And he goes, you're the type of Britisher that caused my wife and I to retire here in the first place. And he storms off. So the lads finally arrive outside of Ali Fraser's villa. And he comes out and he's not happy. And he's like, where the hell have you been? And Oz just says, morning. And Dennis says, sorry, Ali, we got lost. And obviously he sees that they're all wet. He says, have you guys been swimming? And he says, well, it's a long story, like. And Barry starts, then he says, well, it's my fault, actually, Mr. Fraser, because we were supposed to take the right, and I took the right. And he goes, right, fine, lovely, lovely. Get your hairy arses round the back. So we cut to the Spanish police station. Now, interesting fact.
Yeah.
So the policeman, who is called Fuentes, is played by a chap called Ricardo Montes, who was born in Gibraltar. But, interesting fact, George, as well as Fuentes, who else is Ricardo Montes?
I don't know. I can't think.
Well, if you were to fast forward to season 4, when they're in Cuba, he also plays Ophelia's granddad. So he might be the only person that plays 2 different people in the series. Who knows? But Ricardo Montes, like I say, was born in Gibraltar, died in Marbella, and has 49 credits on IMDb. Was in The Avengers, Carry On, Follow That Camel, The Saint, The Oneiden Line, Are You Being Served, Duty Free, Mind Your Language. He was a big part of Mind Your Language.
Yeah, great show.
Was also in Never the Twain and Casualty, and also had a part in Mamma Mia. So yes, was again one of those actors that if they needed a talking Spanish person, he was always there. So they're in the old Bill station. So Fuentes, the Spanish copper, and the old couple. And they've obviously made a complaint. And he says, these people, Senor Oxlade, they break into your house. And he says, well, in point of fact, no, but only because Mrs. Oxlade and I came home. And he says, and you found them in your pool? And he goes, in flagrante, yes. And he goes, not in the pool. He goes, yes, in the pool, in the nude, see. And he goes, and he says, it is not typical, senor, I think, to swim before you rob a house. And he goes, not as a rule, no, but there is no telling the cheek of these people these days. It's not enough for them to steal your so he talks about a clock, your O'Mella clock, whatever, or O'Mellu clock. He goes, they also like to defile your house.
Defile your house, yeah.
And he goes, and there were many of them. He goes, and the wife goes 6 or 7. He goes, at least half a dozen. And I'm ashamed to say that they were British. And he goes, I will investigate, okay? And he goes, well, I hope you're taking this seriously. I'd like to remind you what British riffraff did to Mallorca last year. They reduced its tourist trade by 62%. And he goes, see, Senor Oxlade, I will go where you live, and I will go house to house. He goes, very well. Come along, Pauline. Buenas tardes. And he says, Senora. So we're back at Ali's villa, and they're having a look. And obviously, Ali's is like a building site. It's half-finished pool and terrace. And so they're looking at the plans. And Bomber says, it's nice to think you can retire somewhere like this. I suppose the best I could hope for is a caravan near Clevedon overlooking the Bristol Channel. And Neville says, at least people would talk to you there, Bomb. You'd have neighbours and friends. Well, where out here, you'd probably wind up next to some people like that couple that hired us out the pool today. And Oz says, I know we were trespassing, like, but as soon as I seen his face, I hated him. He's just the sort of person that makes you ashamed to be English. And Barry pipes up and he says, well, in all fairness, Oz, he probably feels exactly the same about you. And Oz says, what? Well, he shouldn't, should he? Because I'm isn't. He is. Every time I see his sort, the hairs on me back curl up. And Moxie says, yeah, the bourgeoisie. And Moxie goes, and Oz goes, yeah, a prick in my language. He's the sort of bloke who'd sit in the golf club all day, moaning and groaning or writing to the papers about how people don't pull their weight. And what does he do when he cops his pension? Whoosh, body swerve down to Spain so he'll not get collared when they tax. And Barry's like, when did you last pay your income tax, Oz, was it? And he goes, well, what's that going to do with anything? So then, George.
We see the famous shot.
This is one of your favourite parts.
Yeah.
So while the lads are arguing, Vicky appears on the terrace carrying a tray of beers. And she
is green bikini.
A very famous, infamous turquoise bikini.
Yeah.
And Vicky says, I thought you lads might be a bit thirsty. And they're like, oh, San Miguel. And Ali Fraser is not happy. He says, Vicky, just bring them over here, will you? I'll take care of that. She puts the tray and he goes, there you go, gentlemen. Help yourselves to a beer. I'll be with you in just a moment. Uno momento. And then he goes, Vicky. And he beckons her inside. And Wayne, straight away, he says, I always wondered what our Vicky would look like unwrapped. And Barry says, oh, pathetic. Anyway, so inside the villa, Ali Fraser gives Vicky a dressing down. He says, look, Vicky, when we've got these cowboys around the place, it might look better if you didn't go around flaunting yourself. And she's as innocent as possible. He goes, who's flaunting? And he goes, do you think that bikini's the height of discretion? I used to use bigger plasters to cover me pimples.
Yeah, she lays on the sofa, doesn't she?
And then she reclines on the sofa.
Yeah.
And then she says, yes, well, you don't complain as a rule, do you? And he goes, well, as a rule, I don't have 7 randy brickies running around the patio. And she goes, well, there's going to be no point in going out there. I mean, I cannot sunbathe. I cannot go for a swim because there's no water in the pool. I cannot play me records because I cannot hear them for the concrete mixer. And Ali's getting the hump. He says, are the arrangements not to your liking, Vicky? She goes, well, I'm just saying. He says, well, is the villa no longer up to scratch? May I just remind you that 2 years ago, when you were a manicurist in Maison Andre, your idea of a holiday of a lifetime was a fortnight in Redcar.
Redcar.
Do you know where Redcar is?
Well, I know it's up north.
Yeah, it's Teesside, so it's near Middlesbrough, and it's an absolute fucking shithole. So,
all right, yeah.
No disrespect to any of our listeners in Redcar, but they'll probably admit Redcar is a shit.
I'm sure it's up and coming now. Yeah.
No, it's not. It's still a crap hole.
It's not. Okay, it's still a shit.
So Vicky says, listen, I travelled before I met you, Ali Fraser. Me and my friend Barbara had 2 successive summers in Magaluf. And then here, a fantastic line delivered by Ali Fraser. He says, oh, well, in that case, he picks up the phone and he puts it, and he says, why don't you give Barbara a bell and see if she's still got the tent? Absolutely delivered very, very well. So this is what I was saying about before. So we see a car coming up the hill.
Yeah.
And it is our Spanish policeman friend.
Yeah.
Now, what you were saying about before with the music, did you notice the way that the soundtrack changed? So when you see the Spanish car, when you see the Spanish police car, it's very slow Spanish style music. Yeah. So it's all like do like, you know, like the sort of flamenco-y style guitar music. And then they cut to the lads working and the music takes a more upbeat tone. And then they cut back to the car and then it slows down to the Spanish style music again. It's very the way they did it was really, really good. And obviously, so the lads are grafting away, and Barry, as always, with his socks and sandals, and Moxie is chatting to Nev, and he says, "Hey," he says, "I must say, Nev, I'm very relieved, you know." And he says, "About what?" And he says, "Well, this country, I really like it." And he says, "Well, I've seen nothing of it yet." And he says, "Yeah, I know, but based on what I've seen, based on what I've observed, it will certainly do me. I mean, everyone speaks English, so you don't have to learn the lingo. The English papers are here by tea time, and all the bars sell English ale, and the sun's always bloody shining. Great." And Neville says, "Well, I suppose there's worse places for a holiday." And Moxie says, "I'm not talking about a holiday, Nev. I'm talking about a new life." And Nev says, "What, you're stopping on?" He goes, "Certainly." Says, "As far as I'm concerned, England's finished. Someone should stick a bloody great notice on it, out of order. I've no desire to go back and watch it go through the death throes." And then Neville obviously points out, he says, "This is now to do with the fact that if you do go back, they'll slam you in the clink." And he says, "Well, that had a bearing on my decision, yeah." And so Neville goes to speak to Oz about it. He says, "Moxie says he's never gone in yem." And Oz says, "Well, it's not surprising, is it? He's among friends doing here, isn't he? This is where all the English villains made for." And he says, "And the way this new extradition law works, anybody that's already here cannot be hauled back." So apparently so. And he says, "Aye, but I can't imagine never seeing home again." And I says, "Aye, but what you're forgetting is he's never had a home at home, has he?" He says, "He says, I mean, the nearest that he's ever had is Dawson with Oxlade in that poxy hut in Dusseldorf. I mean, he's been adrift all his life, man." So Barry's getting some cable from the van, and he sees the Spanish policeman pull up
with his strange nose blocker,
with his thing to stop his nose getting sunburned. And so Barry comes running back round. He's like, "Fellas, lads, Dennis." He goes, "It's the bloody law. It's the old bill. And Oz makes a joke. He says, "Just your luck, Moxie." He says, "They must have altered that treaty." And he goes, "That's not funny, Oz." And Dennis says, "Right, lads, you know the drill, action stations." So they all dump their work and they all grab a sunbed and they all make out like a sunbathing. So
Barry's struggling.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, so the Spanish cop comes around. He says, "Buenas tardes." And Dennis says, "Buenas tardes, can I help you?" And he says, "So what are you doing here?" And Dennis goes, "Tourists, vacaciones." And he says, "Are you staying here?" He says, "No, we're at the Hotel Bella Vista. We're just visiting for the day, friends of the owner." And he goes, "Ah, Senor Fraser." And he says, "Ah," he says, "See." And Barry's like, see, old friends, actually, amigos. "Ah, we go back." And then Ali Fraser comes out and he's, "Ah, Senor Fuentes, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás?" And then he says, "Oh, no, soy siesta." And then he explains to the lads, he says, "I'm just asking Senor Fuentes why he is missing his siesta. What's the problem?" And he says, "Senor Fraser, today I get a report from people who live in this area." And he says, "A report about what?" And he says, "They say they see 7 men in their pool, Englishmen. They think they may be thieves." And he says, "Ah, that sounds a wee bit dubious. what would they call themselves? The swimming bandits?
Swimming
Los
bandits,
Bandidos Navartores. Hey, hey. And Ali Fraser thinks he's made a very funny joke. And he says, and Dennis just says, look, there is an explanation. It was us, but we went to the wrong villa. And then Barry pipes up again. He's like, well, it's my fault, actually. You know the strange right hand. And Dennis is like, shut up, Barry. He's like, we thought that villa was Senor Fraser's and we just had a swim. And the Spanish is like, I see. And Ali Fraser says, so you see, sorry to waste your time, Capitan. You got time to wait for a drink. And he says, thank you, Senor Fraser, but no. And then he obviously realized, No, he's not. And he goes, enjoy your holiday.
Yeah. I like the way they throw a towel over the cement mixer.
Like as if it's just going
to hide it. A little towel over. It's like a tea towel, wasn't it?
And so Ali Fraser says, hasta mañana, adios. And then he comes back and he's not happy. He says, I don't believe you guys. First day in the place and you've already got the police on your case for terrorizing the neighborhood. And Oz just says, yeah, well, yes. He says, it has to be said that if your streets had names and your houses had numbers, this would never have happened, would it? And Ali Fraser's pissed. He says, well, it won't happen again, my pal. It's many times I've had to tell you to keep a low profile while you're here. Keep your heads down and your mouths shut. So we cut to Marbella Port.
Yeah.
Now, this is what I was saying about before, George. So they are in the Club Maritimo in Marbella Port, and it is the Spanish copper with the journalist. Now, that Club Maritimo is just in front of Bubbles, what used to be Bubbles Bar, where we were drinking when you came.
Yes, I think we frequented that a few times. Yeah,
we did indeed. So literally about 20 meters behind that building is the back of the port, and I can't remember the name. It's a different name now, but yeah, that's where Bubbles Bar used to be, and it was an absolute den of fucking scum, and just full of cocaine dealers and that. So, but yes, they are smack bang in the middle of Marbella Port, and so the Spanish copper is ordering some food in Spanish. And he says something about eggs, and he says, and a half bottle of white wine. And he says to the journalist, you don't mind I eat. I know lunch today. And the journalist says, well, make the most of it, Miguel. It's the last meal the paper is paying for. And he goes, why you say this? And he says, they want me back in London. My editor thinks I spend all of my time sitting in the sun, drinking scotch and looking at pretty girls. And that's exactly what he's doing, sitting in the sun, drinking a scotch. And two very pretty girls walk past. And
topless.
Yeah. Well, no. That the first ones have tops on.
Oh, right. Okay. Right.
But then the Spanish copper, he says, I have something for you. And he says, it makes a change. I've been backhanding you for a month with precious little to show for it. He goes, hey, look. He goes, you look for English criminal. I know where they live. I know where they eat. It's not my fault that they don't talk to you. And he says, so have you found who will? And he says, I find 7. He goes, 7. He goes, hey, they stay at the Hotel Bella Vista. And he says, well, that doesn't make them criminals. He goes, they are friends of Senor Fraser. I see them at his villa. He goes, Ali Fraser. He goes, see, they say that they are tourists, but I smell that they are not. They sit around the pool, but it has no water. And I am police in any country the same. I know they hide something. Like, as if he's some kind of prolific detective. He's like, I know that they are hiding something. And he says, well, you never know, Miguel. You might just keep me down here for another week. And that is when we see the beautiful topless girls walk past.
Yeah.
So we cut. So Neville and Brenda are back in the hotel room, and Neville has clearly been sunburned.
Yeah.
And Brenda is rubbing cream on. And she goes, I told you to keep your shirt on. He goes, I know, but I took it off when we were pretending to be tourists, and I forgot to put it back on again. And she goes, well, you'll suffer in the morning. He goes, I'm suffering now. And she goes, look, Neville, you'll just have to remember that we're not used to the sun. And he's like, Dan canny man, when she's rubbing the cream on. And anyway, so they cut to the bar, And Bomber is once again with the old ladies.
Yeah.
And he says, what have you girls been up to today? And the old lady, Beatty, she just says, thank you, I'll have another gin. Clearly pretending that she thought he'd said something else. And the first one says, she gets worse. And Bomber says, she can have what she likes. You're only young once. How about you, my dear? And she goes, I'll just have a sweet cherry, please. And he says, very nice. Don't want you getting too pie-eyed before our first. And I missed what he said. I've rewinded it a few times. And I think, was it Fostrat? I don't know. I can't remember. And he says, tonic in the gin, right? And she goes, that's right. Thank you. And then the journalist walks into the bar and he sees the sat there. So anyway, the lads are discussing the benefits of a siesta, and Moxie says, I like the idea of having a doss in the afternoon. I could really take to that. An afternoon the afternoon is the draggiest part of the day, really, isn't it? And I says, plus, of course, you're foreign, aren't you, here? So you haven't got that class prejudice shite to put up with, have you? Because you're now back here. A bloke like you has only got to open his gish, and he's pigeonholed with the plebs straight away. And Moxie takes a bit of offence. He goes, aye. He goes, what about you then? Most people can't understand a tossing word that you say. And Oz is like, what? He goes, well, I might have a slight accent. He goes, but then, as we've already said a few episodes ago, he says, I know a lot of grammar and vocabulary, doesn't it? Dazzle anybody, me, which is very, very true. Despite his very broad accent, which he considers to be slight, he does have a very, very good vocabulary. And the journalist pipes in, he goes, aye, and he says, all right. And he says, just arrived, have you? And Oz says, aye, couple of days. And then he sees all the pensioners, says, under 30s travel club, is it? He goes, hey, he goes, oh, we're not with them, man. He says, we just got stuck on the same flight. And he says, holiday, is it? He says, no, well, sort of, we're working. Barry nudges him and he goes, what? And he goes, loose lips.
Sink ships.
Barry thinking he's a spy and that. And I was just like, what? What's he talking about? And Barry goes, yes, we are on holiday. Yes, we're a club, you see. And he goes, yeah, what? He goes, what club's that then? He goes, the Wolverhampton and District Aqualung Society. And he's like, it's a long way from the sea, Wolverhampton. He goes, yes. He goes, how true? He goes, that's why this annual trip is so important to us, you see. He goes, for the rest of the year, we have to make do with the reservoir, don't we, lads? And I was just like, oh, aye, we're going, the reservoir. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we see the journalist gets on the phone and he's obviously speaking to his editor. He's like, Ian, it's Nick. He goes, I'm still here and I'm staying here. That payroll job in Sheffield last week, any arrests? He goes, good. He goes, I think they're here. He goes, I think they pulled a crafty one and come out on a charter flight with some OAPs. He goes, trust me, Ian. Look, he goes, get me a flash down here and give me another week.
A flash, I love that. Yeah.
And he goes, I'm not pissing you about. He goes, there's a new bunch of British bandits in town and I'm looking right at them. Mm-hmm. So they're back at work the next day and it's in the morning and it's obviously an early start. And Barry says, you see, you have to start work early in this climate. I mean, that's why your Mediterranean people take a siesta, you see. You can't work in the bloody midday sun. Says it's too hot. Our bodies will just have to adjust. And Oz says, well, drinking that bloody funded oat till 3:30 in the morning and then getting dragged out of your pits to come here at 5:30 is a major adjustment, isn't it? And Bomber says, well, we didn't pay for much of it, did we? If I remember rightly, that bloke Nick forked out for most of it. And Neville says, who's that like? And Moxie says, some Brit said he was in property or something. And Oz says, aye, right nosy bastard, didn't like him. Moxie says, well, you were happy to drink a bottle and a half of his brandy. And he says, so what like? He says, doesn't mean I've got to like him, does it? Mm-hmm. Anyway, Dennis says, right, lads, listen. He says, in lieu of yesterday's panic, I think we should post a lookout, like an early warning system. One of the lads will look out while the rest of a graft. He says, so who wants to do the first shift? And they all try and stick their hand up, but Oz is too quick. And Oz claims it and runs off to take his position as lookout. So we cut to the tennis club.
Yeah.
And Kenny Ames is just coming off the court. And the journalist is waiting to ambush Kenny Ames. And he says, Kenny, and he says, blow me, what are you doing here? He says, hasn't your paper got something useful for you to do? He says, they haven't found Dr. Mengele yet. Why don't you piss off Paraguay? That's a fantastic line. And he says,
the Nazi.
He says, can I buy you a coffee? And he says, I'm deductible, am I? And he says, I'll run to a coffee. And he clicks his fingers. And he says, it's a good job you don't work for the Daily Mirror, isn't it? He says, old Maxwell has closed down his foreign desk and invested all of his money in Oxford United. Now, just on a side note, you know who used to run that Oxford United, don't you? On behalf of Maxwell. His daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell, who's
now in a spot of bother.
Yeah, who's currently in prison for procuring young ladies on behalf of Jeffrey Epstein, who definitely kill himself in prison. But yeah, that Ghislaine Maxwell, I was watching a documentary about her, and she's a bit of a fucked up cookie. So yes, but yeah, she was the one. So
friend of Prince Andrew as well, obviously. Yeah.
So Robert Maxwell bought Oxford United and put her in charge. Anyway, so the journalist says, he says, I must admit my days here are numbered. And Kenny Ames says, well, I'm not surprised. I mean, the old Costa del Crime is old hat now, isn't it? A lot of the chaps have moved on. And the journalist says, well, you're still here, Kenny. He says, well, you've already had 2 exclusives with me, Nick. You should be talking to Terry Leather. And he says he won't play ball. He says, yeah, well, his old lady's got a heart condition in Hainault, you know, and he says he's frightened of her reading something derogatory. And then he said if I printed one word about him, he'd rip out my liver and feed it to the seagulls. So Terry Leather, you know, it wasn't based directly on him, but it was Bruce Reynolds, wasn't it? That's what Stan said. So he bumped into Bruce Reynolds when he was down there scouting out. So, and he said, well, and Kenny makes a joke. He says, well, he must like you then. He can get quite stroppy with the hacks. And then he says, I'm more interested in the new lot. And he says, who? And he says, come on, Kenny. He says, if there's a new chap in town, you know who it is, let alone 7 of them. And he says, who told you that? And he says, I was with them last night till 3 in the morning. And he says, 3 in the morning? Well, that must have loosened their tongues, mustn't it? And he says, I do know that they're friends of Ali's. And he says, that team. So we cut back to the villa, and Oz is at the villa gate, and he is absolutely sound asleep. And, you know, after a skinful of drink and 2 hours sleep, I do.
And a porn mag as well, looks like.
So Kenny Ames drives up in what looks like a Bentley or a Rolls Royce. Yeah. And then he says something.
Yeah, pretty nice. Yeah.
And he pulls up and he says,
hey, George.
He goes, hey, George. Now, this is, I remember back in the day when I was away on this was a long time ago, when I was a kid in Sea Cadets, there was a Cockney instructor who used to call me George. Because the word Geordie comes from King George.
All right.
So I've heard it before where Cockneys have called Geordies George, and that's when he pulls up and he goes, "Hey George," and then he whistles and he bangs on the car, and Oz is dead to the world and he's snoring away. So we cut up and the lads are working, and they're talking about the cement.
I think he had probably a couple of beers as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. And yeah, hair of the dog. And Moxie's talking about, he says, the muck's up, lads, talking about the cement. And Dennis says, hey, keep plenty of water in it, Mox. And Neville says, it's drying out in no time, Mox. And Barry, and he just says, too hot. And Moxie says, make it sloppy. He says, just dries out straight away. So Kenny Ames comes and stands on the corner, and he looks around and he flicks off the radio, and all of the lads look up. But obviously they don't really know who he is, which, well, technically, I mean, they did see him on video, didn't they?
Yeah.
The famous Arthur Pringle video. So,
yeah.
And I mean, if he's been on the front page of the paper, they should probably know who he is. And Dennis goes, Buenas tardes. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, we were and he goes, I can see what you're doing. He goes, good job, I'm not from the Ministry of Works, innit? And Barry says, excuse me, sir, how did you get past our lookout? And he goes, well, I just took the precaution of not waking him up. And Dennis is not too happy. He goes, if you want something doing, you got to bloody do it. You're flipping self. He goes, Oz, get your arse up here. And he goes, I'm sorry to throw you, what is it? He goes, I'm sorry to throw you a wobbly.
A wobbly.
He goes, is Ali Fraser in? And Wayne says, no, I'm afraid he won't be back till about 4. And he says, well, can't be helped. He says, I'm Kenny Ames. And Neville says, how do? And he says, you've heard of me then? He says, we done up your place in England, didn't we? And Bummer says, mind you, it looked a bit different by the time we'd finished with it. And Kenny says, I hope you didn't destroy its essential character, though. He goes, I love that place. You know, when you were stood in the library, you look out across the landscape, it gave you a sense of timeless continuity. And then again, Barry pipes up with his interest. He goes, I know what you mean. That particular view, it reminded me of a constable. And this is a brilliant line. This is an absolutely brilliant line. He goes, bit of a dirty word, that, isn't it? He goes, if it hadn't have been for the constabulary, I'd have still bloody well been there, wouldn't I? That's a fantastic line. And anyway, so Oz comes back and there he is, and he goes, nice one, Hawkeye. And he goes, what's that? And he goes, no, I'm done. He goes, I'm not the enemy. He goes, hey, you chaps have got your work cut out here, haven't you? He goes, certainly have. He goes, what are you doing your days off? He goes, have you had yourself a few laughs now, have you? And Dennis says, we haven't had much time, really. He says, and he goes, I've got a yacht in the port. He goes, if you want to pop down on your day off, you'd be quite welcome. My pleasure. So, I mean, this is a bit of a strange invite from Kenny Ames to just some random.
Yeah. I think he might have a bit of an angle there.
Exactly. There may well be an ulterior motive. And Moxie goes, a yacht, us. And he goes, we don't have to put to sea, nothing hazardous like that. He goes, we just have a chin wag and get pissed in the port. And Dennis says, great, aye. And they all agree. And he says, it sounds great. So we cut to Puerto Banús. So again, George, you and I have been to this very place.
Yeah.
Where they are is on the front line of Puerto Banús. So where I used to work in Lineker's is on the second line. So and this is the front line of Puerto Banús. And Brenda's telling everyone, she goes, this is where we were yesterday. Vicky showed us around, see this restaurant. That's where we saw Sean Connery. And Christine says, well, it might have been Sean Connery, Brenda. And she was determined, she says it was Christine. And Wayne says to Mox, he says, there you go, Mox. This is more like it. He says, you've got your Lamborghinis, your Playboys, and your yachts.
Yeah. And there was a Lamborghini there, wasn't there?
It was indeed, yes. He says it's a bit.
I think we probably, I certainly seen one, I think, when I was there.
Oh, there was loads, yeah. I mean,
it's quite impressive. It's quite impressive, that bit.
Yeah, I mean, that front line in Port Banús, you need to have a special pass to get in. You've got what's called a port pass. You need a port pass to get in. So obviously, and like a port pass is like fucking $5,000 a year or something. You know what I mean? It's like, just to have the card to be able to get your car in there costs.
Did you remember some of the yachts that we walked past? I can remember one that it looked like they had a ballroom in there.
Yeah. Billionaires.
Yeah.
Well, this is where we're going. So Kenny Ames's yacht is parked up on the Billionaires Row. So basically, it's at the front part, but like further down there, that's where you get the ridiculously large ones. And Moxie says, it's a bit too extravagant for me, all of this. And Barry says, I'll bring Hazel right down here. And Wayne says, she's coming, is she? And then Barry's like, almost certainly, like. So Brenda's not too happy, really. And he goes, listen, if you go out to sea, I'm not going with you. I'm not going with Debs. And Neville just says, oh, look, it's just drinks, Brenda. And she says, well, if she gets sleepy, I'm going back to the hotel. And Neville's like, you know, you can't do right for doing wrong, can you? He says, I thought you'd be thrilled about this, Pet. How often is it that we get invited on board of a big yacht? And Brenda says, it's whose yacht is it that's bothering me? This man's a wanted criminal. What would your mum think and what would my parents think? Well, anyway, they're there now, and he says, here we are, lads, nice to see you, come on board. And they all walk on board, and Kenny Ames is making a big deal out of Debbie. And then
you seen the name of the boat?
Yeah, what is it? The
S02E10
or something like that.
Which means carefree.
Ah, right. Well, I'm pretty sure that boat is still actually there.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. I mean, I could be wrong, but it might still be. I'm pretty sure it's actually still there. But as we see, so they all walk aboard, and it comes up, and we can see that the photographs are being taken by the photographer with
the flashes.
With our journalist friend. So the next day they are back at work, and then we see very briefly Vicky comes out of the villa, sees everyone working, and then she's got a shirt on. She wraps herself in the shirt and goes back inside. So I've written down here that she is shirty in more ways than one. And anyway, so Bomber is on lookout duty, and he sees Ali Fraser driving up. So they cut to the lads working, and Oz says, here, Dennis, it must be siesta time. This son's bloody murder. And he says, right, lads, let's have a 5-minute break. And then Bomber comes running. He says, put your backs into it, lads. The governor's back. And Dennis says, who, Ali? He says, I thought he was playing golf in a tournament. And Bomber says, keeping a crafty eye on us, perhaps. And Moxie says, oh, he doesn't trust Vicky, not with Wayne hanging around. And Barry says, don't inflate his sexual ego any further. So,
Ali's in rather a nice Mercedes, I think.
Yeah. So, so they get back to, so basically, Ali Fraser arrives back, and Dennis says, afternoon, Ali, I didn't expect to see you back this early. And Ali Fraser has got a copy of the rag, the dirty rag, The Sun. And Oz says, is that an English paper you've got there? And Fraser says, that's right, Oz. I've got an English paper, something I'd like to read to you here, boys. I don't want to take up too much of your valuable time. If you can gather around, please. So they all come round, and he says, right, are we all sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Spain's Costa del Crime is still a haven for the growing band of Brits who Scotland Yard are, quote, anxious to question. Kenny Ames, 47, who persists in denying he was Britain's king of porn, continues to sun himself on his luxury yacht in Marbella. And Barry's like, all in says, oh, that sounds like the one we were on. And he says, and Ali Fraser continues, he says, no doubt his companions, newly arrived from England, are business associates. And Moxie's, he puts the paper down so they can see the picture, and he goes, that's us. And Oz says, hey, look at that, it's spread. And Wayne says, I've seen much better photos of me than that one, though. And Neville straight away, he's like, what's Brenda's folks gonna say? And Ali Fraser tells Dennis to read on. And Dennis says, I spoke exclusively to the new arrivals at their luxury hotel. And Moxie's like, in their what? And Dennis says they were evasive about their reasons for being in Spain, one of them claiming that they were members of the Wolverhampton Aqualung Society. Obviously, everyone looks at Barry and it says, research has shown that no such club exists. Meanwhile, police continue their search for the gang who pulled off the daring payroll robbery in Sheffield last week. And Bomber's like, who wrote that rubbish? And Dennis says, Nick Wheeler. And then the penny drops. Oz says, wasn't that geezer who was buying all the booze in the bar the other night called Nick? And Moxie says, yeah, it was. And Ali Fraser is not happy. He's like, is this your idea of keeping a low profile? And Dennis says, why? He says, that story's a load of bollocks. And he says, I know that. And I bet half of Fleet Street knows that. And in their efforts to discredit this story, they'll be down here buzzing round you like flies round a jam jar. And Neville says, well, why don't we just tell them what we're ordinary gadgies? And he says, working on my villa, I suppose. Well, that's precisely exactly what I'm trying to avoid, my friend. And he says, oh, I'm sorry. And Dennis says, wait a minute. I mean, we can still be ordinary gadgets just down here on holiday. We just have to make it look convincing, that's all. And he says, and how do we do that, Dennis? And he says, well, you better give us the rest of the week off. And so we cut to the back garden of the Oxlades, our posh couple. Now, you wouldn't expect them to be reading The Sun. But
No.
the scum that they are. And
they're nosy bastards, yeah.
And he said, Jeffrey says, good heavens, look at this. And she goes, I'm not surprised. One only had to look at them. And Jeffrey says, I sometimes wonder if Worthing wouldn't have been a better idea. So we cut back to Kenny Ames's yacht, and Ali is not happy. And Kenny's trying to placate him. He says, Ali, he says, why would I want to embarrass you? And he says, you know, Kenny, I wake up every morning and ask myself the same question. If you'd wanted to draw attention to my situation, you could not have stitched me up better. And he says, you weren't the mark, son. I wanted to rubbish that Nick Wheeler. He's been right pain. Now his credibility is down the pan. They'll have his arse back to Fleet Street, which will be a great relief to me and Terry Leather and the rest of the geezers. And he says, and I've had to lay my lads off for 2 days until the heat dies down. He says, well, I can see that's a bit of a pain. He says, well, you could help me a wee bit, Kenny. He says, you could help me to reinforce the impression that they are tourists. You can invite them back on your yacht. And he says, are you kidding? Have you seen how much they drink? And he says, yes. So anyway, Moxie, Barry and Oz, they walk into town, which is, like I say, Fuengirola. And Oz says, he says, that's the place someone was telling us about. Apparently there's lots of Brits hang about in there, and it's a bar called The Office. And he goes, and they have a gargle in that. And Barry's just like, anywhere, let's get out of this sun. So they cut inside to a bar called The Office. And there are some strange autographs on the wall.
Bodie and Doyle.
Yeah, so there's a one from Bodie and Doyle, and it says, to the professionals, from the professionals. And then there's a one of the goodies, and it says, to the baddies, from the goodies to the baddies. I mean, obviously, clearly a bit knocked up. Now, we see someone who we find out in a second is Terry Leather. And Terry Leather was played by a chap by the name of Eric Mason, who had a very long, illustrious career from 1943 to 2010, with 101 credits on IMDb, including The Saint, Doctor Who, Z-Cars, The Sweeney, The Likely Lads, Dixon of Dock Green, Minder, Grange Hill, Bergerac, London's Burning, The Bill, and finally, Hot Fuzz, the film, which is one of my favourites. So, that's our final cameo of the episode. Anyway, so Oz says, that's more like it. Morning, he says, we'll have 3 glasses of San Miguel to start off with, por favor. And Terry Leather, like I say, we don't know it's Terry Leather at the time. He says, but here, says only some of the Sheffield mob. And Oz laughs. He says, I have a good mind to sue the bastards about that, you know. And Moxie says, sue. He says, I sue. He says, I'm serious, sue them. He goes, it was liable what them written in the papers, you know. He says, you can get a lot of money, you know, suing people. Might even get a yacht of our own. And Barry says, they cover themselves, Oz. They get teams of lawyers, check it all out. And he says, they never say anything directly. We still get the stigma mind, guilt by association. And Moxie says, well, it's settled it as I'm concerned. I can't even go back home now, even if I wanted to. The die is cast. And I says, piss off. He says, yeah, the only bugger anybody could recognise in the picture. He says, look, man, you've got them stupid bloody aviator bins on. and you read to the back and you read to the focus. Anyway, so the barmaid puts the beers down and says that will be 600 pesetas, which, if memory serves me correctly, that's £3. So £1 a beer. And Terry Leather says, that's all right, Jenny Love, I'll get these. And Oz says, no, you're all right, pal. He says, thanks anyway. He says, we've got in enough trouble lately with accepting drinks from strangers. And he says, no ulterior motive, mate. It's just we've seen your picture in the paper. He says, and Lionel, he says, I'm thinking of sticking it up here with all of the other stars. Anyway, so Barry goes off on a rant. He says, I'd rather you didn't if you don't mind. He says, quite frankly, this has all been a great embarrassment to me. You see, I don't believe in the unhealthy glamorization of the criminal fraternity. Law-abiding taxpayer, actually. And then as he starts saying that, you see like everyone starts gathering round and getting closer. And he says, I've no desire to be lumped together with the Kenny Ames and Terry Leathers of this world. I mean, behind the facade of their luxury villas and their blonde lady friends, you have to remember something, that they are despicable people. As far as I'm concerned, the sooner they are shipped back to England and served 25 years penal servitude at Parkhurst, the better for all of us. And he says, well, that's a point of view, of course, and very well argued. And he goes, Barry Taylor, and he just goes, Terry Leather. And Barry has put his extremely large foot into his even bigger mouth once again, and that is the end of the episode. So our credits, obviously the seven get their credits, and then we have Ali Fraser and Kenny Ames on one credit, Christine, Brenda, and Vicky on another credit, Jeffrey, Pauline, and Fuentes on another credit, Nick Wheeler, Terry Leather, Lionel, and Carlos, and finally Alice, who's obviously the name of the old dear, Beatty, Russell, our camp tour guide, and Debbie Hope is on the final credit. So that is the first Spanish episode over and done with. And already the cat is amongst the pigeons. So we will see what they are up to. They will see what pigeons and cats are up to in the next episode. So, like I say, we've seen the lads arrive in Spain. We've seen the delectable Vicky in her bikini.
In the bikini.
Met the local copper, and the local journalist has stitched them up with the help of Kenny Ames. So we will see what happens next week. So if any of our watchers or listeners have got anything they'd like to comment about this episode or anything else, please do email us on aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com. Please follow us on Instagram, Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Our Twitter @Auf Again. Please do like and share the Facebook page, Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast, and please do invite your friends to like it. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast, and click that bell to be alerted to any new episodes. Or if audio is your thing, please do listen on Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google Podcast, Breaker, and many, many more. And so our new episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. Our theme music is composed and performed by the guitar man, Mr. Lee Dosky. So please do help us out and like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Remember, the podcast sponsor is Top Gun Tattoo of number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading. That's www.topguntattoo.co.uk. 01189 968 667, and you can get a 20% discount of any tattoo with Zach with the code word Hadaway and Shiteman. And remember, free Neville and Lottie tattoo for every single watcher and listener. And remember, our giveaway competition at the moment is for this picture, this original, genuine, signed picture of the 7 in Dusseldorf. Copy that you can win by going to our social medias, follow us on social media, like the post, tag 3 friends, and share that post. So, that's all for this week, George.
Yeah, that was it.
So next week we get into more action on the Costa del Sol.
Yeah, it gets better. It gets even better, I think.
Yeah, very much looking forward to the remaining episodes of this series. So, for all of our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in, and please do tune in next Friday at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
And until next week, George, first of all, we say hasta la vista, adios, and Auf Wiedersehen Pet.
Auf Wiedersehen Pet.
Oh, yeah, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I binged out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I sign up to Scum.